Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alexandra Papaikonomou, and before we start the webinar, I would like to run through a few logistical items for the webinar. Please note that all of your lines have been muted. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat section. We will be covering them in the Q&A session after all of the presentations are over. If you come across any issues throughout the webinar, please send a direct message to myself, TRCA host, within the chat section. So let's begin. On behalf of Partners in Project Green, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. Partners in Project Green is a growing community of businesses working together to green their bottom line by creating an internationally recognized eco-business zone around the Toronto-Pearson area that's also known for its competitive, high-performance, and eco-friendly business climate. Through these regular webinars, we hope to bring the latest technologies, programs, and tools to the comfort of your office while providing a format to ask questions that will help you discover the right solutions for your operations. Partners in Project Green offers many resources to help companies along their journey to sustainability, and I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about our programs, training, events, and much more at www.partnersinprojectgreen.com. So this afternoon, we are actually exploring a very timely topic of local flood risks. With more frequent and intense storms, it's become very evident that businesses need to be flood prepared. We're very fortunate to have speakers from WaterTap and Toronto Region Conservation calling in this afternoon from London and Toronto, Ontario. I'd also like to remind everyone that we are going to be drawing we will be actually drawing for a book today. We're very fortunate to have Carrie Freaks and Robert William Sanford's book that is being launched this coming Monday, and we will be awarding that to one lucky participant. And the book is called Flood Forecast, Climate Risk and Resiliency in Canada. So we're actually going to be starting off with Alyssa Serbu, who will be providing a background on existing stormwater infrastructure within the Pearson Eco-Business Zone. Alyssa is the project coordinator within the Watershed Stewardship team at Partners with Project Green. So I have unmuted you, Alyssa.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. So to kick off this webinar, we at Partners in Project Green wanted to give an overview of stormwater management from the perspective of the municipalities and regions that comprise the Pearson Eco-Business Zone. So we sent out the following questions. What do you do in relation to flood risk mitigation? What happened on July 8th? And have there been any initiatives spearheaded since that flood? So in terms of flood mitigation strategies already in place, rather than list off each individual municipality's offerings, some key patterns and trends that are evidenced across the 4 regions are large capital projects, stormwater and flood management studies, downspout disconnection programs, stormwater ponds, and long-term stormwater management strategies, such as the Wet Weather Flow Master Plan in Toronto, as well as the Natural Heritage and Environmental Management Strategy in Brampton. The next question involved their experiences on July 8th, and we challenge you to also think a little bit about this. Where exactly were you during the flood on July 8th, 2013? So for the region of Peel, they sent us this photo on the top left corner. They received a high-level flow alarm from trunk sewers, as well as a high-level alarm from several pumping stations. Several of these stations actually overflowed, and secondary treatment was also bypassed for a period of time at one large wastewater treatment plant. Affected residents were placing a high volume of calls to a number of different locations and call centers. For the City of Toronto, shown in the top right corner with a flooded photo of the Don Valley Parkway, they experienced significant flooding of roads and watercourses, causing disruptions to public transit services, as well as substantial bank erosion in various watercourses. Additionally, within a month after the extreme event, the number of basement flooding reports exceeded 4,700, which is 10% more than the volume from the previous major storm in August 2005. For the City of Brampton, 22,000 homes in the southwest part of Brampton experienced a power outage at approximately 6 p.m. Heavy rain caused flooding and damage in a number of the city's parks and recreation facilities, and the city commissioned their transportation and works crew to provide immediate assistance and repair to these areas. For the City of Mississauga, hourly intensities at some rain gauges exceeded the 100-year design storm, and this was the second time in 4 years where a high-intensity storm struck Mississauga. Severe flooding was caused by water over top creek banks, overland floods on roads, and sanitary sewer backup. The storm caused power outages in around 80% of Mississauga, and they received over 850 calls over the course of 2 days. They triggered their emergency response plan as well. So in terms of actions taken since July 8th, we wanted to show what municipalities were doing as a response to the storm. Although a lot of these initiatives shown on this slide were already planned for these municipalities, the storm really allowed them to gain some momentum and improve a lot of the projects for future implementation, as well as address current gaps in their stormwater management systems. For the region of Peel, the region secured the services of an external contractor to gather information from affected homeowners. Local councillors organized public meetings and invited both the region and city staff to participate. The region and the cities have developed flood mitigation projects and strategies that are in various stages of implementation, and they're also working on coordinating a flood response plan with Mississauga. For the City of Toronto, since the flood, City Council has directed that the basement flooding protection program be expanded to include more areas negatively impacted by the storm. Along with this, the City has continued to conduct stormwater environmental assessments as well as gain momentum on their existing stormwater programs. Additionally, City Council also directed multiple city divisions to jointly develop standards for implementing green infrastructure on public right-of-ways. For the City of Mississauga, it was estimated that $1.2 million in operational and planning costs will be needed to respond to these events. Directly after the storm, they helped maintain and repair general watercourse damages, such as washed-out trails, sinkholes, and watercourse debris. Additionally, Council approved a number of flood risk mitigation capital projects for 2014, including a new Cooksville Creek stormwater management facility, a Cooksville Creek crossing improvement and flood protection project. The City will also be undertaking a flood evaluation study in several watersheds, such as Thurston, Applewood, and Little Etobicoke Creek, as well as a flood management study in Malton. Additionally, they plan on implementing and rolling out their stormwater surcharge fee, which was developed from their stormwater studies. Additionally, they will coordinate with the Region of Peel for their emergency flood plan. So that's it from my section. Feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. We're actually going to be going on over to Carrie Freak. I'm just going to change it over to her slides right now. Carrie is the Manager of Marketing and Communications for the Water Technology Acceleration Project, also known as WaterTop, and she's also a writer. She's been published in fine Canadian magazines such as Corporate Knights, Alberta Venture, and Alberta Views, and her first book, Flood Forecast, Climate Risk and Resiliency in Canada, will be published by Rocky Mountain Books in May 2014. I'm just going to unmute you right now, Carrie. Just give me a quick second, and there you go. It's all
set?
All set.
Okay. Thanks very much. I firstly want to thank PPG for inviting me to speak as part of this webinar. It's very timely. It makes a lot of sense to be revisiting what happened last year at a time when we may be experiencing very similar types of weather and see exactly how the cities have responded in the past and see how that might affect the way that we respond in the future. I'm very pleased to be part of Partners in Project Green's Water Stewardship Committee, which is working toward making some significant change in the Eco Business Zone, in the Pearson Eco Visit Zone. And again, thank you for inviting me to speak today. So I just wanted to start by just telling you a little bit about what WaterTap does and why it's relevant to what we're speaking about today. The Water Technology Acceleration Project, or WaterTap, is Ontario's water sector champion. Our job is to promote Ontario water expertise to the world, so we're all over the place. Today I'm in London, Ontario. Our CEO is in Germany at EFAT, and he's singing the praises of all of Ontario's wonderful water expertise and technologies. We also offer business acceleration services to the Ontario water technology sector and work very closely one-on-one with a lot of the companies that are doing really good work to help offer solutions to problems such as stormwater management. WaterTap was formed in 2010 as a result of, well, or a little bit after 2010, but it came about as a result of the Water Opportunities Act, which was passed in 2010, which is to take advantage of the groundswell of excellent expertise that we have here in the province. So Ontario is known throughout the world as a global water hub, and we're working on strengthening that reputation and ensuring that we get a lot more business here in the province and outward facing in the years to come. Just because I'm not sure, I got a list of the people who were attending today, and I wasn't sure exactly who knew what. I just wanted to quickly discuss why it's important that the ICI sector is managing stormwater. Just quickly, rain and flooding on your property can disrupt your business, and it depends on the degree of damage on your property, but it could be for days, weeks, months, and even years, and it could be quite costly. You could have the potential to flood neighboring properties, or with the runoff going to other places, end up in causing serious environmental damage. So those are just some reasons. There's a clear business risk involved with stormwater, and it's a clear responsibility that businesses take charge and implement some ways to offset some of that contribution to receiving bodies. Some of Toronto's stormwater challenges, in the GTA, well, I think compared to a lot of jurisdictions, Ontario is very progressive in the way that it manages flooding. You saw from Alyssa that there's a great deal of work being done, and a lot of it precedes what was happening on July 8th. However, we have a significant problem, and cities, environment, homeowners, developers, and insurance providers are still struggling with some major issues. So I'd like to talk about overland flow, insufficient and under-designed infrastructure. That's not my term. I'll explain why. And increasingly extreme weather events, and then funding challenges. So to do with overland flow, I think since Hurricane Hazel, that was a really defining moment for Ontario, and the province since then has put hundreds of millions of dollars into protecting the province from flooding. But at the same time, we haven't really properly accounted for overland flow, which is the natural path of water that is disrupted by exacerbated urban growth and development. So anywhere you've got impermeable surfaces or building stock that's disrupting the natural flow of water, it's ending up somewhere else, like your basement or your neighbor's basement, or perhaps in a receiving body of water that ends up being a drinking water source for 8 million people, i.e. Lake Ontario. So we have, while we've been trying to protect Ontario from flooding, we've essentially deferred the flooding floodplains to create new ones that are man-made. We have a problem with under-designed cities that can't meet the demands of exploding populations and extreme weather events. Our cities simply do not have the capacity to manage the extreme weather that we're experiencing. That's not because it's under-designed is a bit of an unfair term. It's something that I heard when I was researching for my book. It's basically meaning that cities are designed to the technology and development of the day. So people could not possibly be projecting into the future that we will have such extreme weather, such vast populations, and such development to have planned for that in the past. And one example is combined sewer systems that older cities such as Toronto and Hamilton still rely upon. Toronto itself, about 25% of the population still relies upon combined sewer systems. And combined sewer systems collect sewage and stormwater in a single system of pipes. And that can lead to some very dangerous bypasses. Bypasses happen when the system is over capacity and the water has to go somewhere, and it can't all go to the treatment plant, and it ends up in a receiving body, a creek, a stream that ultimately ends up at the lake. So a particularly shocking fact, I think, is that on July 8th, Toronto bypassed the equivalent of 428 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of untreated stormwater to Lake Ontario. And I have a personal friend who was actually unaware of all of this, and it's not uncommon, but he was ready to go swimming at the island, the Toronto Island, just days after the storm. without any idea that this stormwater could contribute to some high E. coli counts, and not to mention other chemicals and toxins that may make their way to the lake as a result and very close to the shore. Even areas with new separated systems can't handle this weather. I was speaking with the City of Hamilton, and some of their jurisdiction, some of their areas that they're responsible for are on new separated systems where sewage and rainwater are treated separately, are in different parts of different systems, and even those systems flooded in new development. So clearly, we're not thinking as far ahead as we can, and the drivers are not there for developers to be putting into place sufficient stormwater infrastructure. So all in all, I think the message is that we've neglected the value of natural infrastructure by doing things like even burying rivers to make way for development. So City of Toronto, for example, has a network of buried rivers that cause all number of issues as a result of being buried and built upon. We are facing increasingly extreme weather events. The July 8th storm triggered more than $940 million in private insurance claim, according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and that set a record for Ontario in insured damages arising from a single natural disaster. This is a problem we can't ignore. The Insurance Bureau of Canada is working hard to work with municipalities on how they can help prevent basement flooding, but we're still not really addressing at a policy level how we can prevent polluting our waters as a result of stormwater in urban environments. We're also, everybody, including the experts, the people who are supposed to know about climate, are still very uncertain about what a change in climate means for the world, let alone Ontario. But municipalities and people with property are being forced to deal with it. And one of the big questions is, how can you plan for something that's uncertain? I think in my discussions with many municipalities that are developing climate change adaptation plans, a lot of them don't really know what they're shooting for. It's kind of a blank canvas, and until we know what exactly we're dealing with, we can't build to spec. We've crossed the point of 100-year storms, and we don't really know what's around the corner. Additionally, we have an issue with limited funding at every level of government. Talking with municipalities, again, that's a chief concern and a chief complaint, that we just don't have enough money to cover the cost of new infrastructure, whether it's replacement or upgrades, and cities have little revenue to finance these upgrades. As I mentioned before, there are not as many regulatory and financial drivers to encourage or enforce change among councils, developers, and businesses, all of whom should be working very closely together. And I'd like to mention, too, that I have some very good examples of these different stakeholders working well together. So it is happening, and that's encouraging. Some of the trends and approaches that I've noted over the past little while that I think are good signs for managing stormwater include introducing stormwater utilities and user rates and incentives and bylaws in municipalities. An example would be the City of Kitchener, which uses revenue from its new stormwater utility to fund stormwater infrastructure, but at the same time it offers incentives to encourage property owners to implement low-impact development on their properties, and in exchange they get credits toward their user rates. An example of a bylaw can include something like the City of Toronto's Green Roof bylaw, which requires new commercial, institutional, and many residential applications of a certain size or more to have a green roof of a certain percentage of the overall size of the roof installed, which of course has the benefits of managing stormwater, but has many additional benefits, such as a nice space for recreation and also cooling of the building. People are also incorporating low-impact development measures and technologies into existing treatment trains and demonstrating the return on investment. And I say that I believe that the TRCA and Credit Valley Conservation are two leading examples of stakeholders that are working very hard to make this happen. Low-impact development is essentially, in a nutshell, working with nature to manage water as close to where it falls as possible. And at times it can be an incredible return on investment and incredible value to the people who install it. but also to the municipality at large. If you're slowing the flow of rainwater and treating it on a property where it falls, you are helping to address some of the capacity issues in stormwater infrastructure, and you're sorry, you're helping municipalities, and you're helping your own property. There have been some excellent demonstrations and case studies in the past few years around the savings that are possible doing this. People have also been very active in looking at where new developments can trigger upgrades to adjacent roadways and adjacent infrastructure, and implementing LID measures like rain gardens or bioswales or permeable pavement in those areas, and using the opportunity of new development to get in there and do it when we have construction already underway, which helps defer some of the cost of implementing LID. I think also that TRCA and CBC have done some extraordinary work around community outreach and advocacy. They've worked very closely with the various cities in their jurisdiction to help encourage the creation of bylaws, and they've also worked very closely with the public to position LID as a thing that's on trend and beautiful to install, rather than something that is perhaps not as palatable to homeowners, for instance. Simply saying things are environmentally friendly is not going to get anybody on board. So they've actually worked very closely on marketing these techniques in a way that seems desirable. I want to talk about a few of the Made in Ontario solutions that have been demonstrated through Ontario's Showcasing Water Innovation project, which funded 32 projects in the water space, water, wastewater, and stormwater space over the past few years. The results are starting to come in, and it seems like many of these projects are creating incredible value for the province and for the jurisdictions in which they're implemented. Very close to where we are, we have the Showcasing Water Innovation, or SWI, funding that was used to retrofit the parking lot at IMAX's head office in Mississauga, and it's helping build better stormwater management on site. That project involved close communication with IMAX, CBC, and companies from Ontario like Imbrium, who have now renovated or retrofitted the parking lot to help collect stormwater and filter pollutants before runoff finds its way into Sheridan Creek. It means cleaner water will now go to Lake Ontario, which is, as I mentioned before, a drinking water source for nearly 8 million people, which is about half of the province's population. And it also means that less runoff will enter the municipal system during flood events, which removes some of the burden on the municipal infrastructure. The technologies that they used in the parking lot include bioswales that use landscape grass or floral rain gardens that absorb and release water slowly and filter the pollutants in the meantime. They've also used industrial water filters that remove pollutants and slowly release the rainwater before it travels to the municipal system, and permeable pavers that are specially designed with spacing bars to create gaps for water to infiltrate into engineered soil where it captures contaminants. These systems allow water to drain away from the parking lot surface, and has the additional benefit of extending the life of the parking lot by eliminating potholes and other deterioration that happens as a result of water damage. The second project I want to quickly discuss is another Showcasing Water Innovation project that was coordinated by Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority and involved companies Stantec and Aquifer Beach. They retrofitted 3 existing stormwater facilities in 3 different communities in the Lake Simcoe watershed, and used Ontario-based technologies to lower the amount of phosphorus that's discharged from stormwater facilities, improve the water quality, and then cost-effectively retrofit these older facilities. We have videos, by the way, of all of these projects that I'm mentioning, so if you have an urge to look at how it's working and which companies are involved, you can find them on the WaterTap website, and that's a link that is provided in the slide. Another and final example is using biology to treat stormwater effluent. So in the town of Lindsay, Ontario, which is within the city of Kawartha Lakes, Another showcasing water innovation project involves a company called C&M Aquatics, which creates floating wetlands and uses the biology of the wetland plants to treat the stormwater effluent and remove phosphorus and nitrogen before it's distributed to receiving waters. This project traps these nutrients, and it's also scalable. They're hexagonal phytolinks, which you can see pictured in the slide, use plants and their root structures to filter out this effluent and improves the water quality and better stormwater protection. I want to touch on the fact that Ontario is home to more than 20 companies that provide complementary, innovative stormwater and flood prevention solutions that include things that I've already discussed, like capture and treatment technologies, but also rainwater harvesting and collection that could be implemented in concert with green roofs, such as rain barrels, for instance, and then also be part of a grey water reuse system so that buildings can actually reuse the water on site instead of ending up distributing it to a receiving body. And then also there's some great technology around erosion control, and which costs cities and municipalities a great deal of money every time that it floods or any time water levels get too high. WaterTap is happy and available to assist with connections to technology vendors in this space and many others, and you can find a growing list of the companies at the link that I provided in the slide. It's a growing list, so if you don't see the company that you know in there, I'd love to receive an email that details who I might connect with in order to add to our list. The bottom line, I think, is if you're in the Pearson Eco Zone, it's really important to protect your property and the surrounding environment from the impacts of rain and flooding. And you can start by considering how to slow the flow to municipal systems or capture and manage stormwater on site. And I think that partners in Project Green, WaterTap, or any local conservation authority would be very happy to provide tips and advice on how to create a plan for your site. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to any questions, assuming that there's time for them. And I just wanted to, again, draw some attention to the book. We're having a lunch in Toronto on May 22nd, and Rob Sanford has looked at the effects of climate change as a result of the southern Alberta floods, and my portion of the book looks at the city of Toronto and the surrounding area and urban flooding and what we can do as a society to change the way we think about how we manage the asset that really fuels our economy and our lives going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Crary. We will be actually taking questions at the very end of the presentation. For those who are online, if you can actually type in the questions as you hear or come up with them, they will be covered through the chat section, so you can start that right now. I'd like to actually introduce right now Lorian Farrell. Just give me one moment here. Lorian is a water resources engineer and holds a master's in landscape architecture. She joined the Toronto Region Conservation Authority 9 years ago after several years in consulting. After the August 19th, 2005 storm that washed out Finch Avenue in Toronto, Lorian's focus shifted from development review modeling and fluvial geomorphology to flood forecasting, emergency management, and public communications. She is now the Senior Manager of Flood Risk Management and Infrastructure and leads TRCA's flood management service, which includes flood risk management, data management, hydrometrics, and the control and maintenance of flood control infrastructure. Just give me one moment now. There we go. I'm going to unmute you, Lorian. There we go.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So thanks very much, Alexandra, and thank you for the organizers of PPG for inviting me. One of the goals of our flood management service here at the TRCA is to raise awareness about flood risks, and so this is a great opportunity for us to reach an audience that we don't usually get to come out and talk to. So thank you also to all of the participants for your time today. I'm going to dive right in by, well actually let me just see if I can get my slides to advance. I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty. Alex, are you seeing my?
Let me just actually switch over. So let me just.
Oh, I think I got it.
Yeah,
now.
you got it?
Hold on.
Okay, great.
Maybe let me just see if I can.
There we go. I can see that now. It's over to the next slide.
Okay, so I'm going to dive right in by pointing out some of the watershed characteristics that go through the eco-business park. And so the area that PPG covers actually has 3 different major watercourses run through it. The first is Etobicoke Creek, there is the Mimico Creek, and also the Humber River. And I'm going to have to, let's see, I'm having trouble again, Alex, with this. I might have to get you to take over.
I'll do that right now. Just hold on one moment.
Sorry about that, everybody. So I'll just keep talking. Some labels should have popped up on your screen that will show some of the different tributaries of the major water courses. So in Etobicoke Creek, there's actually quite a number of tributaries. There's the Spring Creek, the west branch of the main Etobicoke Creek, which runs up through Brampton, a smaller tributary that's really unnamed, we just call it Tributary 5, and there's Little Etobicoke Creek. There are also 2 what we call high priority flood vulnerable sites within the Eco-Business Park. The first is the Avondale SPA, and that is has a sort of a butter-colored circle with a red blob in the middle. The red blob indicates the boundaries of the special policy planning area. And there's also the Malton FCA up to the northeastern part of the Eco-Business Park. There are also several flood vulnerable sites, priority sites, or those yellow circles, that are south of the Eco-Business Park. It is important to note those because any flows that run out of the business park actually affect those flood vulnerable areas downstream. Oh, I seem to be, are you seeing the slides go forward now? Alex?
So there should be, this is my screen right now.
Okay.
So you should, yeah.
Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, the majority of the area of the Eco-Business Park is located within the Etobicoke-Mimico watersheds, and they have very distinct physical characteristics. Their valleys were carved through shale, making them very prone to quick erosion once that shale is exposed. They're long, narrow watersheds, and that means that the runoff from the land reaches the rivers very quickly. So when it rains, these watersheds are flashy, and we see flooding very fast. There are 46 stormwater management ponds within the Etobicoke-Mimico Creek watersheds. However, if you look in the little inset map there, you see a variety of different colors. Those colors represent areas that actually are being treated by ponds. And it's not a lot. It's only about 30% of the watersheds, which means that 70% of the land base is uncontrolled. That really affects the water quality and the quantity and the erosion potential within our river systems. But the good news is that this is a great area for revitalization projects, and anything we can do in these watersheds can really make a difference, a real tangible difference on our water systems. So moving on to the next slide. Conservation authorities in Ontario are responsible for floodplain management, and this responsibility was delegated to us by the MNR. It's important to note that our mandate is for riverine flooding, not urban flooding. And Carrie really gave a great overview of our description of what urban flooding is. And I'll speak to a little bit more in a few minutes. The way we've managed our floodplains has evolved over time. So people needed to be near water in the early days in Ontario for social and economic reasons, and they built near the rivers. And then after Hurricane Hazel, we moved through to another era where we tried to control the water as much as possible for our own convenience, really. We built a lot of large flood control dams and flood control channels, berms, and dikes, and we tried to control the water. And this era lasted from about the 50s to the mid-1970s. And then after that, there was a shift in paradigm, and it was decided that the best thing to do would be to keep out of the way of water and to really restrict development in the floodplain and to let the water do what it needed to do, to let the rivers move as they need to move and to be dynamic and healthy, stable systems. So to assist us with that endeavor, we have the Conservation Authorities Act and Regulation 16606, which is what helps us manage development within the floodplain. So on the next slide, you'll see examples of recent flooding in TRC's jurisdiction, and all of these pictures were taken within the last 10 years. On the top left-hand corner, you see ice jamming in the Humber River. This is an annual occurrence. It's quite spectacular when you're actually down in the river seeing this ice move. And we had a lot of ice jamming this past winter. The top right-hand corner is a picture of the infamous Finch Avenue washout in 2005. As a result of this storm, I have the job that I do today. My whole world changed after this storm. The bottom two slides show a picture of the Bayview extension after a flashy thunderstorm in 2008. I believe it was July. And this is the same location where the GO train was flooded out in this past July 8th storm. And the bottom right-hand corner is an interesting one. It's the after effects of that 2008 flashy thunderstorm. And we often overlook the recovery that's required after a storm event when we're doing our planning for flood management, but it is a major component of the work that we need to be doing. So on to the next slide, we see quite a number of different types of severe weather events in our jurisdiction in southern Ontario. But we're limited to the types of storms we experience by the global weather patterns. So we pretty much know now that we have 4 types of events we need to prepare for. We have the flashy thunderstorms in the summer, very difficult to predict. They come and they go so quickly that it's often difficult to mount a response or a prevention. We have hurricane season from August to October. That's the one that brought Hurricane Hazel, which really formed conservation authorities as they act today. We can see these coming a few days ahead because we can watch the hurricanes developing off the coast, and we usually get hit by the remnant activity of these hurricanes as they track north and east. Hurricane Sandy was a very close call for us, actually. It didn't cause any problems in Toronto, but we were prepared for it to set up just like Hurricane Hazel did because the conditions were so eerily similar. Unfortunately, the storm, after a few days of tracking toward us, took a couple of degrees to the east, and we got away with it. But we know that that type of storm has happened once, and it could happen again. We also have rain on snow events, which are very dangerous because the rain that falls isn't really able to soak into the ground as it would in the summer months. That snow can only hold so much water. And we have the spring melt, which in a winter like we just had could be a major issue in our water courses if the temperature rises too quickly. Fortunately, this spring came slow and steady. I know a lot of people didn't like that, but from a flood management perspective, it was perfect conditions. So the snow was able to melt gradually. So if you just click twice for me, Alex, you're going to pass those global systems and move on to the urban flooding slide. So I wanted to just touch a little bit briefly on urban flooding versus riverine flooding. And as I mentioned, Carrie did a great job of setting me up for this one, so I won't dwell on it too much. But basically, we call urban flooding when we have storm sewers being overwhelmed and they overflow, as opposed to riverine flooding, which is when the rivers rise and overtop their banks. So the municipal systems were actually designed so that the roads would capture the water that's not able to get into the storm sewers. In Brampton and Mississauga, it's a standard 10-year storm sewer capacity. That's what they were designed to convey. Anything above the 10-year storm and up into the 100-year storm is going to be traveling through the road systems until they can find an outlet to a river or a lake. And this is fine in terms of design. It's a nuisance for people that want to drive home right away, but that's the way the systems work for us. You will have heard about the storm return periods, the 1 in 100-year storm, the 1 in 10-year, Hurricane Hazel. And I know they're confusing terminologies for people, but essentially it's just saying that there's a probability of having a certain size storm happen in any given year. The 1 in 100-year storm is bigger than the 1 in 10-year storm. It doesn't mean that we'll only get a 100-year storm once every 100 years. You could have them back-to-back or a couple of times in a decade, as we've seen, and we will continue to see. Hurricane Hazel remains in southern Ontario the largest storm on record. And yes, it was bigger than the July 8th storm, even though the media widely reported that July 8th was bigger than Hazel. But, there were 2 completely different types of animals. One was a hurricane, one was a thunderstorm, and the way the water behaves when it hits the ground in those 2 situations is very different, as we saw. Both cause widespread devastation. And on the next slide, you can see an example of the urban flooding that happened in the July 8th storm. So you can see the water being conveyed along the roadway. The center of the roadway is actually not as deep as the outer edges near the curbs. And Carrie, I think, no, sorry, not Carrie, Alexandra, if you skip forward 2 slides, because I actually changed my presentation since I sent it to you, to a graphic that's called the July 8th, 2013 storm. And you'll see a hyetograph of the depths of rainfall. So it's blue, a map of our jurisdiction. Blue areas are where the most amount of rainfall hit during the July 8th storm, and then dissipating into low rainfall amounts, green in the east. So you can see that the majority of the storm on July 8th was centered around the Eco Business Park area in Pearson. Our gauges captured similar amounts to the Water Survey Canada gauge reports of 126 millimeters at Pearson on that night. And as I mentioned, they were very different. It was a very different storm than Hazel, but it was extremely devastating for many property owners. However, I do need to mention it was not as bad as it could have been if we hadn't had our current floodplain management policies in place. And our policies are quite unique in Canada and also in the world. A lot of other jurisdictions envy our ability to restrict development within the floodplain. And it has paid off in spades, although it's difficult to quantify. And after the July 8th storm, we had very little issues with riverine flooding because of this. Our problem was mostly due to erosion. We estimated about $30 million in damage due to erosion. And of course, the municipalities were overwhelmed with basement flooding issues. And so that will be an ongoing issue that we'll have to be dealing with collectively. So can this happen again? So on this slide, I'm showing a picture of Southern Ontario and highlighting some of the storms that we've had historically. We've experienced many severe weather events, and we only expect to see more. So we need to keep ramping up our preparedness. July 8th was not an anomaly. We've seen it before, and we will see it again. Recently, the federal government announced $200 million toward a National Disaster Mitigation Fund, and that's enough money to start studying the issues toward how can we deal with mitigating flooding or reducing flood risks across Canada. But as we know from our recent work at the TRCA, we could use that $200 million just to mitigate flooding in one of our flood risk areas. And in TRCA, we've identified 42 priority areas for mitigation. However, it's a major step in the right direction, and we're looking forward to seeing what type of support we can get from the federal government and the provincial government in the years to come. So that's I'd like to switch gears a little bit. I talked to you a little bit about what's happening locally in your area in the business park, and now I want to talk to you a little bit about our flood management service here at the TRCA and what we do. There are 4 major components to our work. We identify flood risk areas and reduce that risk where possible through constructing flood control infrastructure, through public education. We issue flood warnings, and we're always developing new forecasting technologies to try and improve our ability to predict flooding. We also maintain and operate flood control infrastructure, and as I mentioned, we have 10 dams and 16 other flood control structures like channels and dikes and berms. We maintain a hydrometrics gauging network, and we also have to manage all of the data that comes through those measuring instruments. The next slide speaks to our flood messages, and everyone is welcome to sign up to receive our flood messages. Those are our flood warnings, flood watches, flood outlooks, and water safety statements. We have flood duty officers on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to issue these messages and to operate our large dams if needed to protect targeted areas from flooding. There are 3 levels of messages, and I'm just going to briefly explain to you what they mean. So if you do sign up to receive them, you'll know what to do in the event that you should get them. So the first level is our yellow level. It's a watershed condition statement, and there are 2 categories, a water safety statement or a flood outlook statement. And essentially these are messages to the public to let them know that we've received enough rain that the rivers are going to be flowing pretty full, and we want them to exercise additional caution near the rivers. A lot of people don't see rivers as a danger, so we constantly need to be reminding them to be alert, to talk to their children about dangers around water, and also to be careful with their pets. Often people will go in after their pets. When the pets fall into the water, the pets will get out and the people, unfortunately, succumb to the flooding. So this message is really geared toward the public. The next level of message is our flood watch, and this is when we know that the rivers have been flowing full, so we've received over 20 to 25 millimeters of rainfall already. The rivers are full, and we're expecting more rain on the way. And at this level, our municipal partners start to think about what they should be doing in terms of a response. So do they need to be bringing in additional staff to clear catchments, catch basins? Do they need to be looking at road closures, evacuations, whatnot? So they're just getting prepared because we're predicting that there may be some trouble. And then our final level is our red level, which is our flood warning, which happens when flooding has occurred or is imminent. So there are a number of good resources available for you to check out. We have a flood center on our TRCA main webpage. You can always call us on our flood line if you have any questions. We'd be happy to answer them. You can also follow us on Twitter. This is probably the best way to receive our messages now because we've recently become better at tweeting out our messages and providing updates in between messages on Twitter. And we also have a great website called trcagaging.ca where you can go online, it's open to the public, and you can see what's happening in the watercourses near you that we have real-time gauges on. And there's a plethora of information there for you to sift through as well. The second last item I'd like to share is about our flood protection strategy. We updated this strategy in 2013, and it identified those 42 areas that I talked about that we've identified as high-risk areas, and they're the areas that we want to start to look at to reduce the flood risks. So for me, now the next 20 years I have is to dive further into each of these sites and determine ways to reduce or preferably eliminate the risks within each of these areas. As we move on to the next slide, in order to identify the priority areas, we ran each area through a screening tool that assessed all of the factors that you can see there on the left hand of your screen in a purple-blue sort of color. Once we were able to rank and prioritize the sites, we need to go through each one and do an environmental assessment and to secure the funding. Which is something that Carrie spoke to earlier, which I was happy that she mentioned, that funding is limited for these types of projects. So it will take some work to position ourselves to be ready to implement them. The projects would involve things such as increasing culverts or bridge openings to allow water through, creating more storage, diversion measures, or even land acquisition in some cases. Another benefit to this project now is that we have every structure within the floodplain digitized and linked to parcel fabrics. So we can share this information with our municipal partners at their offices of emergency management to use in our flood response effort. So the last topic that I'd like to speak to is about what you can do in your individual businesses and properties to reduce your flood risk or to deal with flooding. The conservation authorities and the municipalities are looking at the large-scale solutions, but there's a lot that can be done at the site level as well. And I mentioned there are policies restricting development. So if you plan an expansion or a rebuild, check with the TRCA first to see if you require a permit. And up on the screen right now, you'll see a list of some things that you can do. So Carrie also talked about LIDs, and that's my first tip, is to reduce impervious areas on your property any way you can, and LIDs is a great option. Floodproofing of your buildings, and floodproofing could be something called active floodproofing, where you have to actually do something to block the water from coming into your building when you know that the rain is coming. So it could be as simple as installing watertight doors or doing sandbagging. Then there's also passive floodproofing, which is floodproofing that's always in place. You don't have to worry about taking action during flood. It's going to be there for you. And those would entail things like installing a continuous berm if you know that your property is prone to flooding, or a flood wall. Or you can also raise the openings of your buildings, raise your electricals off of the floor, elevate your critical equipment. So if you know that you're going to get a couple of inches of water every couple of years, it would be worth the investment to raise up some of your materials. of course, floodproofing of a building is much easier to achieve in the planning design stage of the building than it is to do a retrofit. But there are some possibilities. And any new structures that you would want to put on your property would be subject to floodproofing before you could get a permit if you were within a regulated area. The next tip is to have an emergency management plan that incorporates flooding into it. So you probably already have fire plans and other types of plans for your building. So it's just a matter of turning your mind to what to do during a flood. How do you communicate with your employees that they don't need to come in or that they should be leaving early because of a flood risk? And the main goal here is to have people not driving through water, because a lot of the damages we saw on July 8th were to cars and people being stranded. And people just don't understand that water is dangerous, and you just cannot see what's under the water. The road could be washed away, and we've seen so many tragedies around the world, and even in North America, because of people just not taking another route or not waiting for the water to recede. One other thing that you can do is to report your flooding to your municipality or the CA. It should be very helpful for us to help with our planning. A lot of times people don't report because they don't think that that the municipality can help them. But just knowing where all the risks, all the problems have been, helps us decide what to do next and where to do our mitigation. And finally, I just wanted to show you a picture of some of the examples of LIDs that you could put on your properties. Carrie went through all of the benefits of LIDs very well, so I won't reiterate it now. But one of the main things I love is that they can be so beautiful. And so you can be doing something very good to create dynamically stable systems, river systems that are healthy, and also enhance your site at the same time. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. These were just some of the highlights of what we're doing to reduce flood risk in the TRCA. And it was very quick, but I'd be happy to come and speak to you about your individual properties or to speak to you about some of the issues in greater detail individually at your companies at any time. So just feel free to contact me. My information is up here on the slide. And please feel free to send us your pictures of flooding if you have them, so we can build our knowledge base and continue to promote the need to stay diligent when it comes to flood risk management. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Lori. That was a great overview. We do have a few questions, and I hope more can come in. Carrie, I've unmuted you, and I was hoping, Alyssa, that you can unmute yourself as well. Our first question is either for Carrie or Lorian. What are the affordable flood risk retrofits that can be implemented by businesses? And both of you have been unmuted.
Flood risk retrofit. So at a building itself? I guess?
Yes.
Yeah, so it would really depend. So the depth of flooding is really going to be the key here. So if you have just a few inches of flooding or even up to 1 meter of flooding, it's really not that difficult to construct a berm around the property or a swale or something to try to control that water. When you get into the deeper flood risk areas, where if you're in a special policy area, and you have historical flood issues, it's more difficult, and you probably need a broader scale, sort of watershed-wide approach to it as opposed to an individual approach.
Great. Carrie, did you want to speak to anything? Or?
I think that would be my recommendation as well, although I'm not technical, so.
I think so. So a couple of things I mentioned at the end there, raising your electricals off the floor. I know we have some businesses in the lower Don that have taken care to not, the way they design their building is making it easier to recover after a flood. So they didn't install drywall. They have concrete panel walls. So after a flood, they can pop off those concrete panels, dry everything off, pop the concrete panels back on. They had some wood on their floor, but then after a flood, they realized that wasn't going to be good, so they got rid of the wood and went with a concrete floor. And one of the issues they had, too, was their elevator really landing on the first floor, which is required due to code, is where they had most of their damages. So they were going to try and work on a workaround solution where maybe they could have their elevator land above the first floor. But there are definitely some things that could be done. It's very individual, I guess, site-specific.
Okay, great. Thank you. Could either of you comment to the extent of municipal liability for damages to properties adjacent to floodwater systems that failed during the July storm and actions to mitigate to date?
Could you just repeat that? So Infrastructure
So
near?
the extent of municipal liability for damages to properties adjacent to floodwater systems that failed during the July storm in last year, and then some of the actions that have been used to date to mitigate them.
Okay, Carrie, that sounds like it's one for me since it's more of a government question.
Something to add just after that, but go right ahead.
Okay. Well, one of the problems is that it's impossible to mitigate flooding. So in terms of liability, we get asked this quite a lot. Who's responsible for it? It is a natural system. And so you could say it failed, but then the other point you could say, well, it's just a lot of water, and although we have a statutory obligation to manage the floodplain, we're not obligated to control every single type of event that could ever happen in perpetuity. So in the legal system, there's a bit of a check and balance as to the liability. And the tests for liability, I think, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I shouldn't speak to it, try to speak to it too eloquently, but essentially the city and the conservation authorities are not liable for flood damages.
Okay. Another one for you, Lauren, I think, is are flood management practices localized, or can there be a common guideline applicable to multiple locations, either regionally, provincially, or nationally?
So flood management is standardized in the province. The Ministry of Natural Resources sets the guidelines, establishes the guidelines for the rules around flooding. So when can you develop, when can you not develop, what mitigation options are available to us, and how should they be designed. That's all regulated and administered by the province. There isn't a federal program, so each province kind of does it in their own way. And then when it comes to the municipal level, in Ontario, the municipalities that have conservation authorities really look to the guidance of the CAs for how to implement that. But we have a Greater Toronto Area Flood Group, which is the 8 CAs around the GTA, all working together and coordinating how we implement flood management.
Okay. Carrie, I think I missed you in the previous question. I think you had mentioned that you wanted to say something.
Oh, I think I would just mention, and I'm not a lawyer either, but I do know that there's some upcoming legislation in the future, in the very near future, that would look to the liabilities of the liabilities around climate change for developers and for people responsible for designing buildings. So it's something to watch. And additionally, the Insurance Bureau of Canada notes that Canada is the only jurisdiction, one of the only jurisdictions in a group of jurisdictions, large jurisdictions, that doesn't offer overland flooding protection to residents.
In the G8.
There are some options for private sector businesses that might be suitable for private sector business.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question about the July storm. Why was there no declaration of a disaster following that storm? And what would this declaration have meant in terms of funds available to help mitigate losses?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And it really speaks to the way emergency management is structured in our province. The July 8th storm, so there are certain things that declaring a disaster or emergency can do for the municipality. The most important being it triggers the ability for the municipality to apply for disaster relief assistance. There's a program called ODRAP, Ontario Disaster Relief Assistance Plan or Program. A municipality has to declare an emergency to be able to be eligible. One of the rules of the program, though, is that before you're eligible, you have to have exhausted your resources, or the damages have to exceed, I believe it's 4% of your tax base. When you're talking about risks or damages in a municipality like Mississauga or Toronto, it's very, very difficult to exceed that threshold. And we didn't hit it in the July 8th storm. So actually declaring an emergency would not have opened up that opportunity for relief. The other thing it does is it gives different powers to the mayors in the cities to make decisions in various ways that wouldn't follow the normal protocols. So you really need extreme circumstances to need those rules shifted or changed. And the July 8th storm, from an emergency management perspective, was actually not was not out of control. It was something that the municipalities could handle very easily with their resources in terms of fire and police, EMS. They weren't taxed. They had extra resources. They had shelter and support in housing in place. And so they didn't need, from an emergency management perspective, to have that declaration. Although publicly, I think the perception was they should have had it to be able to apply for assistance. In fact, it would not have made a difference.
Great, thank you. That was a great explanation. Are there any municipalities considering citywide or watershed-wide LID implementations to reduce flooding?
Karen, do you know if any?
Well, I think, City of Kitchener is probably the best example that I know of where they've done this project with the stormwater utility, and they're offering incentives to property owners to do LID on their property and get credit toward those user rates. I know that a bunch of other cities are considering that, including the City of Toronto and I believe City of Mississauga. A lot of other people are considering how they can finance stormwater upgrades, and a lot of it comes down to putting it down to the user and putting it to a user rate. So they're trying to find ways to make this acceptable to users because it's another tax, as we all know.
Okay, great, thank you. And how can neighboring organizations collaborate to further improve their flood risk mitigation?
That is a good question. I think one of the challenges we have in the Conservation Authority is we work very well with the municipalities, but we're somewhat disconnected from the individual landowners. So I think if someone was interested in fostering that discussion in the Eco-Business Park, perhaps through PPG we can get a discussion group going. Because, as I said, the LIDs, they're not going to solve all of the flood risk problems, but the more people that have them, the cumulative impacts, or the cumulative benefits really become tangible then in terms of reducing flood risk for the more frequent storms and also changing some of the major impacts of those larger storms. So I think that it'd be something that's maybe we should look at closer to see how we can coordinate that.
Great.
Well, I'll add that if you are partnering and you're collaborating with other organizations or businesses or sites or jurisdictions that it tends to be that the province enjoys here leveraging those collaborations, and that perhaps are looked upon as favorable and make you available for funding.
But I want to also add to that is that Partners in Project Green's water programming is going to be developed and we're actually working on a program to be launched in the next few months. So definitely get involved there, and we're going to be actually helping businesses mitigate some of these risks as well through our programming over the next few years. So this is definitely on our top of mind, and for sure, if you have any questions, please reach out to Alyssa Serbu or Eric Milliden, and they can for sure help you there. I also actually want to announce the winner of the book, of Carrie's and Robert's book. We actually drew George Liu is going to be the winner, and we actually have an extra winner, Kathleen Bay. So we will be sending you the copy of the not even launched book right now. So hopefully everyone, we can see a few of those people who are attending today at the May 22nd book launch that Carrie promoted. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you so much, Carrie and Alyssa and Lorian, for joining us this afternoon. We hope everyone enjoyed the presentations. The presentations will also be sent to everyone with a recorded link as well. So again, thanks again. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye now.